The member for Morialta.
Thank you, sir. I indicate that I'm not the lead speaker.
Shame.
Tragically. Sir, the opposition, as we outlined during the debate on the Appropriations Bill, supports the bill. It is appropriate to do so. Estimates is the tradition by which we go through the scrutiny of the appropriation in detail. Different parliaments have different processes. I've been through 16 estimates now. This is my last one. I'm not going to say that it was with enormous sorrow that I'm unlikely to sit through another one, but there are things about the process that I'll miss. As Stephen Griffiths used to say, the former member for Goyder when he was here, estimates is a tremendously interesting process to go through if you're paying attention. You can learn an extraordinary amount about the things that the government does. It's a process whereby the ministers will usually try and find an opportunity to highlight those things of which they're particularly proud, but in a more long form than you usually get the opportunity to do so. And opposition members will highlight issues that they are concerned about and have the opportunity to process those in some detail. And they'll also seek to get to the grits of things that are otherwise unclear. I remember Ian Evans, the former member for Davenport, when I entered the place about 15 or 16 years ago. He used to encourage us all to really respect the estimates process. He said that when he was a minister, I'm certain he said this publicly, I think he said it in his valedictory speech, so I don't think I'm talking out of school. He used to say that estimates was a wonderful time as a minister to ensure that as a minister you were actually across everything that the department might not otherwise want to tell you about, because they would be relying on you during that estimates process to be their spokesperson. The person who would be presenting whatever issue they were uncomfortable about in the best possible light. Reams of parliamentary briefing notes prepared and presented for the minister to have an understanding of either the reasons behind some otherwise potentially awkward looking decision, or indeed the detail that they think you should say and the detail that they recommend the minister keep in their own confidence. Over the years, it's been a regular thing to highlight the inefficiencies of the estimates process, and certainly there are administrative opportunities for improvement that are fairly easy in some senses to do. I think that the Standing Orders Committee of this Parliament might care to take, half an hour to bash together a dozen dot points. I'm sure the Acting Deputy Speaker, the Treasurer, the member for Finniss and I could do it after these comments, and we'd get some excellent ideas. But I don't want to get bogged down in those details. Those sorts of administrative improvements that might streamline the process are fairly obvious. I highlight that every Parliament has its own variation on budget estimates. The federal parliament does it all in the Senate, the upper house rather than the lower house. They do it 3 times a year. I assume they still do this. This was the time when I was working there. And they use it as an opportunity to bring the public servants and officials in to be questioned directly rather than the minister having everything funneled through them. Is that better than our process? I don't know. It's a different process. There's something to be said in the Westminster tradition for the minister taking responsibility for every aspect of their portfolio. And I think that the point that Ian Evans made about the minister as the spokesperson having everything brought to their attention, it means that even if those questions aren't necessarily asked in the estimates process, there is of course the benefit to the Parliament and the people of South Australia of the public servants hopefully being more on their toes. It highlights, sir, I think the critical importance of a minister who is curious, a minister who is questioning and isn't just going to assume that their public servants know everything. I don't say that as a slight on the public service, sir. I say it as the duty of a minister in this role, because without that duty, you might as well not have elections. We would have a technocratic approach. I mean, let's face it, the Department of Premier and Cabinet is made up of some really smart people who on every Cabinet submission will put forward a paper on what they recommend the Cabinet does on that submission. And an opportunity is available for every Cabinet decision just to agree with whatever the public services come up. And by and large, we'll go along okay if that was the case, but we would miss some terrific opportunities. We wouldn't have moved Year 7 into high school. We wouldn't have undertaken substantial reform of early years literacy in 2013. We probably would have by the time the Liberal Party was elected in 2018, because by that stage the public service had reached that point. There wouldn't have been a second city high school in 2008 and 2009 when people were calling for it, but they would have got there by 2015 and 2016. There are opportunities that the elected government must bring to improve the decision-making of what would otherwise be going on in the public service. When the Marshall government was elected in 2018, Stephen Marshall made it very, very clear to all of his ministers, to all of us, that as a new government, it was critical that we show respect to the public service, that as new ministers, we may have had our portfolios for some period of time, but that we didn't know everything, and that while we should be curious and engaged and challenging to our public servants, it was critically important that we demonstrate respect at all times. And I hope that for the large part we did that. I certainly hope for the large part that I did that. And in that vein, I want to thank all of those public servants who supported the committees that I participated in. The advice that they give to ministers has had enormous amounts of energy put into it. There are some things about process that we sometimes find interesting in the public service. In an education sense, I'm sure that it won't come as a surprise to members that they may have come across a local constituent issue where the constituent may have approached the education department. They may have spoken to a teacher, they may have spoken to a principal, they may have spoken to the complaints line, and then as a last resort, they may have spoken to their local MP. The local MP may write a letter to the minister or approach the local education director. They may approach the minister in the parliament. That question will often then go through a series of processes where ultimately the minister's office would approach the bureaucracy to seek advice on how to respond, and the executive director would seek a response from the director, would seek a response from the education director in the local area, would seek a response from the principal, would seek a response from the teacher, and then it goes all the way back up the line. And that is replicated all across the public service. I mean, that is, you can understand how these processes happen because you want to ensure procedural fairness. But sometimes also, sir, we just need to get to the point. And that is also the duty of a curious, engaged minister who understands their brief and who is able to add value to the processes of the department through their judgment, through their understanding, through their knowledge and through their hard work and diligence. Estimates is a good time, sir, to get a sense of how those ministers are going. I think that there are some ministers who have done well during the estimates process, and some who've highlighted that there are opportunities for improvement. I commend ministers in a general sense when they don't take too many Dorothy Dixes, if you like, too many government questions. I don't deny that there are occasions, and I certainly resemble the fact of the minister who did take the occasional government question. There are occasions when you need to highlight, or certainly want to highlight, good work that the government is doing. And especially in some of the longer sessions, a couple of government questions can actually be of assistance to the shadow minister who might otherwise been going for 2.5 hours straight without a break and flow to think, okay, how can I best use the next allocation of time I have here? We've been talking potentially about this one topic for the last hour. Maybe I should allocate the remaining time more effectively in that 2 or 3 minute break while the minister takes a government question. I recall earlier on in my parliamentary career a couple of examples where ministers would take the mickey. I'm not making the habit in this contribution, because I hope people will take it in good faith, of naming names, but maybe they can make some guesses as to who was the minister that I was directly responsible to as a shadow a bit over a decade ago, who in a 1 hour session managed to take 3 opposition questions in between the 13-minute opening statement and the 6 government questions that they managed to get themselves asked by having the chair of the committee go to the government side first. It wasn't a portfolio where I can imagine, it wasn't the member for Light, I can assure you. It wasn't a portfolio where I would have thought there was any fear of making constant front page news. It was remarkable to me that this happened. Anyway, it was an experience that fortunately we didn't see on this occasion. Indeed, I commend those ministers who took no government questions, or at least if they were taking government questions, kept those answers brief. I think that there are opportunities in estimates to highlight to parliamentary colleagues issues that are really important for a minister or a shadow minister, and bringing those issues to the fore is really interesting. One of the things that sometimes comes out of it is if the advertiser or other media publications are paying attention to estimates, those journalists can learn some extraordinary and interesting things too. I'm really interested in how the government's going to go, and I don't mean this in a particularly loaded, critical way. I certainly hope it goes well. But the new accommodation facilities that are associated with the technical colleges in Mount Gambier and Port Augusta that we spent a bit of time talking about in the session on Monday. The member for Light was chairing the session. I didn't anticipate that we would spend so long on it, but it was interesting the way that as information was provided through that session, it raised more questions that hopefully the process of estimates will bring to more attention of indeed not just the minister and potentially the chief executive of the department if they hadn't been giving as much attention to those issues. The question of 44 students doing weeks at a time in a government boarding house, 15 to 19-year-old students, males and females, away from their parents for the first time, many of them at a really interesting age in their lives, I do think is going to have some complexities and some challenges to it. I think what the government is trying to do with this, if you're going to have brand new facilities to encourage kids into pathways to work, then absolutely bringing in kids who are able to come from other areas and stay there is a worthy goal. I hope that the government has put in place every possible mechanism and matrix to ensure that this is going to work. The matrix within which this is being organised within the government, the Department for Education, is, as I understand it, from the camps and the unit within the Education Department. So the camps and program has rules about if kids from schools are going on overnight or even longer term camps for a period of time. And if that's the framework that we're doing for longer stay boarding houses, then that might work, it might be sufficient. I certainly hope it is, but I suspect that the boarding houses will present challenges that the camps and excursions team hasn't dealt with before. I trust that there are some really dedicated public servants working on this. But it is ultimately the government's responsibility, and having had some time talked about in estimates on this issue, I'm sure that the Minister and the Minister's office will now be giving it a large amount of attention in the coming weeks as Port Augusta comes on track ahead of those first students that are going to be there. I'll be interested to see how often those boarding houses are used, because I understand that they're not going to be used for months at a time. Indeed, it's more likely to be week-long blocks for students that are coming in for a period and then going back to on-the-job training, and then coming back to the technical college for a period and then going back to on-the-job training. What that means for the staffing allocations will be something that I would have thought the Treasurer would be very interested in, because if the Education Department is uncertain as to how many students are expected or anticipated to actually be using this boarding facility for a period of time, but that boarding facility in the meantime needs to maintain expert staff. I understand Port Augusta, due to be open in 6 weeks if the building is finished, they've already got 5 full-time staff, presumably will need more. At the moment, they're looking after an empty boarding house that hasn't started yet. Now, that may be necessary to recruit the staff to have them ready to go, and if it's going to be full for the rest of the year, happy days, that's been a good investment. But we'll be certainly interested in exploring more information. Say all of these things with respect. It could be an outstanding addition to the public education system. But it is not entirely a novel addition, but it is certainly a massive expansion. I think it's Lucindale, Borough and Cleve that currently have boarding schools within the public education system. Cleve, I visited the accommodation there. I think that it was run by the Department of what used to be called Families and Communities. I imagine maybe Housing SA now. And those facilities were certainly not state-of-the-art. Those facilities needed a lot of work when I visited in 2020 or 2019, and I would have loved to have seen more work done in that space, but obviously the second half of my time as Education Minister was utterly dominated by COVID, and indeed we weren't encouraging large-scale new borders during that time for the complexity of arrangements looking after those borders. But that was a small number of students, I think up to about 12 in about 2 or 3 houses, and they were all within a certain cohort. From memory, either Borough or Lucendale isn't run by the government at all. It's a private boarding facility that is adjacent to the school, and the other one is similarly of modest numbers, a much smaller size than the 2 new ones. So this is a big expansion of what the government's doing, the sort of things you learn about through the estimates procedure. I encourage those ministers who are coming out of estimates, maybe they feel very relieved, maybe they feel very proud of themselves that there was no scandal that came out of the process, or at least not yet, that their answers haven't identified any problems. I recall one of the early ministers that I was shadowing, a story came back to me that he got back to his office, and I was so proud that he felt he'd dealt with everything, or she, it could have been a she, he or she had dealt with everything very well. But the public servant responded, but you took 133 questions on notice. And from an opposition's point of view, we love it when ministers take questions on notice. There's an obligation that an answer is going to come from an estimates procedure that doesn't exist necessarily at other times. You can have a minister in question time saying they'll take a question on notice, and as a result of this government's decision not to renew the standing order requiring an answer to be provided that the Marshall government imposed on itself, we may never hear back. But we will hear those answers back from an estimates process. And so for all of those questions taken on notice, I commend the public servants preparing those answers to be taken on notice for the work they're doing. The opposition looks forward to receiving those, and the information therein, I'm sure, will garner some public interest. Sir, I don't propose to detain the House any longer than is necessary. I think I commend the Hansard of those estimates processes to the Chamber, to members to have a look at for those ones that they missed. I am sure that assiduous viewers of the gallery, the member for Light will report that the Estimates Committee A had twice as many viewers as Estimates Committee B's, which suggests to me, frankly, that there are more public servants from those ministers' departments tuning in and not doing any work. But for those members of public who are watching, I hope they found it a useful process, and I certainly express my gratitude to those public servants who supported the information being provided to the public, and I hope that as they prepare those answers to questions on notice, they'll do so in the context of providing as much information as possible, because at the end of the day, the public has a right to know how their money is being spent.